Midnight Strangers, Chapter 1. Grian wasn't expecting to actually witness anything on his way home from the clinic. His coworkers had begged him not to go, had repeated over and over that there was a criminal activity warning in place, but he hadn't listened. Instead, he walked right out the door without a second thought. Half of what fueled his willful ignorance was exhaustion, and the other half was sheer delusion, but all of it was dumb on his part. By that point, he just couldn't bring himself to care about potential threats in the area. The city was big, overrun with criminal activity, in his humble opinion. Grian had done some shoddy math in his head and decided the chance of him running into anything was low enough to risk it. He was aware, subconsciously, of his own stupidity, yet he simply could not stay at his job for a minute longer. After 14 hours on shift at the emergency vet clinic, Grian was desperate to get home. The too smooth fabric of his scrubs and the scent of cleaning solution had overstimulated his tired mind ages ago. He could practically hear his bed calling to him as he neared the end of his work shift. It would be such sweet relief. Then, the peace of night shifted into something more sinister. Distantly, his ears caught on the sound of voices, shouting something that was indecipherable from so far away. Grian looked around, a frown on his face, in an attempt to pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. However, the sidewalks and roads remained visibly empty. Finally, Grian dared to glance up, and though the insufficient lighting of the street lamp, he caught sight of a silhouette. A man stood on the roof of a building, balancing precariously on the edge. His form swayed in a nerve-wracking manner, way too unstable for being so high up. Gravity seemed to agree. Grian could only watch in slow motion as the stranger tipped further and further backwards with every beat that passed. There came a sound like that of a sharp whistling. Then the figure stumbled, his last remaining foothold slipping out from underneath him. He was falling. Grian's breath hitched, heart capitulating into his throat. He tried to scream, tried to call out, but nothing would leave him. All he could do was gasp as the man fell down, down, down. There came a sickening thud from within an alleyway. The world returned to silence. It took several precious seconds for Grian's mind to catch up to his body. He wanted to gag, run, and break down all at the same time. The building wasn't necessarily the tallest, but a fall from that height very well could have meant death should one land incorrectly. There was a non-zero chance that Grian had just witnessed someone die. The reality hit him like a truck. His legs shook, vision blurred, and head spun. Someone could be dead a little more than 20 feet from him. Someone could be dead in an alleyway without even so much as a warning. Someone could be dead, and he was the only one around to witness it. Oh my God, Grian rasped, a terrible thought flickering to life behind his eyes. He was the only one around to witness it. If this man was by some twist of fate not dead, he was the only one who could call for help. Grian fumbled suddenly to switch his bag to his other hand. It was a hefty thing, almost constantly too full with equipment and emergency supplies should he ever have to make a house call for a client's pet. As soon as his grip was freed, he moved to grab his phone. Unfortunately, he came up empty. He panicked, dropping his bag to search through the numerous pockets in his scrubs. His phone was supposed to always be in that one spot, but now he couldn't find it anywhere. Maybe by some mistake he'd thrown it in with the rest of his medical supplies, though that wasn't something he could picture himself doing. Grian paused his frantic searching. He was wasting seconds he didn't have. The frustration bubbled to the surface, gathering through his veins into a hurried sort of armor. His resolve hardened, and he recognized that he couldn't afford to stand still for a moment longer. Grian took one last deep breath, picked up his bag, and sprinted in the direction of the alleyway. It was dark as he turned the corner. The lamplight only reached so far, and there were several piles of empty boxes and dumpsters to cast shadows in bothersome locations. Grian focused himself to hold his breath and just listen. Search for a shuffling sound, a heavy breathing, a groan of pain, anything to indicate the man was still alive within. Nothing. He would have to confirm it with his own 2 eyes. Grian pressed further into the alleyway, unsure of what waited beyond, while his eyes adjusted. Every footstep was calculated and cautious, painfully small as well. Part of him feared he might step on a corpse if his strides were too large. Better not to allow false confidence than to desecrate someone's final resting place. At last, a sound that did not originate from him echoed off the brick walls. Grian's head swiveled around, heart lurching and mind chanting, "Not dead, not dead, not dead." But dying was not out of the equation yet. Grian rushed forward, disregarding his earlier concern now that he had been given a rough estimate of where to go. He stumbled over broken glass, tripping over stray boxes, but did not slow. After ages of waiting, his eyes finally got used to the darkness, enough to see the vaguest shape of a person propped against a wall. He practically collapsed by the guy's side, mind moving faster than he could handle. Years of training flooded through him, so much so that he was moving involuntarily before he could stop himself. Grian took the man's hand, feeling for a pulse. It was hard to distinguish, and he poked around his neck next. A meager thump, thump, thump surprised him there. Then he let a finger rest beneath his nose, a few shallow breaths brushing his skin. The man was alive, but nowhere near in a steady state, and certainly not conscious. He rocked back on his heels to take in the sight of the man, trying to plan out his next moves. Even though his eyes had adjusted as best they could, finer details were lost to Grian. The cause for the man's ailments, beyond falling from such a tremendous height, could not easily be deduced. He needed light. Grian turned to his bag and restarted his search for his phone there. Supplies clinked, but no matter where he dug around, it was nowhere. He was beginning to suspect he'd forgotten it at the clinic. Not good. Without a phone, he'd have neither a sufficient light source nor a way to call an ambulance. There weren't even any passerbys on the street for him to beg for help. The vet debated on what little choices he had. Perhaps if he channeled all the energy he had left, Grian could carry the stranger until they encountered someone else, or maybe just into the nearest bit of lamplight. That sounded easy enough. He lifted large dogs at work all the time, so surely this wasn't much different. Agreeing with his own line of thinking, Grian leaned forward and blindly felt around where he could vaguely see the man's shoulders to be. Unfortunately, in doing so, he was made aware of exactly how wide in stature the stranger was. His shoulders were broad and his arms were fit. More than that, while he was knocked out, he was dead weight, which made everything harder. If the rest of him matched in scale, then Grian likely couldn't lift him far enough to make a difference while he was like this, especially should he wish to avoid injuring the guy further. It was for necessity's sake that he let his hands clumsily feel around the other's torso, just to see how difficult this was going to be. A groan came from the stranger's throat, low and pained. Then Grian felt something strange. It was warm, and as soon as he touched it, his heart stopped. Shakily, Grian shifted his hands slightly over. He nearly screamed when they made contact with a long, thin stick feathered at the end. No light was needed to know what he'd discovered. An arrow. There was an arrow buried in this man's side. He hadn't simply fallen off a building at all. He had been attacked. It was deliberate. Grian wasn't stupid enough to miss what that meant about the culprit. Only a few people in the city use something as old-fashioned and flashy as arrows for weapons nowadays. Villains. Despite being so certain that he wouldn't encounter anything, Grian had gone off into the evening and found someone who had reached a much worse fate. Getting shot by a villain, toppling off a roof, relying on a stranger without proper human medical knowledge. Whoever this was, his luck was beyond rotten. And now he was Grian's problem as well. The confirmation of a larger wound solidified an upsetting truth that had been festering in the back of his mind for several minutes. No way to call for help, no time to hesitate any longer. No use delaying the inevitable. The puncture wound of an arrow wasn't a laughing matter. A variety of things could lead to the death of the man across from him this instant. Blood loss, the piercing of a major organ, infection from the dirty alleyway, and the impact of falling from a rooftop were just a handful of the dangers that could compromise everything. Grian had no choice. He was going to have to fix this himself. "Alright," he whispered, mentally hyping up his own skills. Though he couldn't see it, Grian let his hand brush against all his equipment, listing them off in his head. He had the materials necessary to clean and stitch up the wound. However, there was a distinct issue with the few painkillers he kept on him. The dosage for human would be difficult for him to calculate without knowing his patient's weight, and they didn't have time to waste. With or without a numbing agent, it would be fine. The procedure would be fine. The patient would be fine. He repeated in his mind that it was fine until he almost believed it. Surgeries of various severity were things that he'd done frequently for animals at the clinic. Pets were wiggly little things covered in layers of fur and often with much less tolerance for physical stress than humans. For procedures like the one needed in this situation, they required anesthesia and a lot of patience. A human should be easier. They could reason, withstand, and survive. It was unlikely the intense stressors would cause the guy's heart to give out the way it might a rabbit or other small animal. Shamefully, a mountain of nerves bubbled in his chest regarding the specifics of the scenario. All he knew about arrows was through historical texts and late-night internet searches. His mind was warped with disbelief and anxiety at actually putting that minuscule research to good use. Still, it had to be done, or else it would quickly become much worse. There was no telling the next time someone would walk past with a working phone, and that was fine. Out of all of the people that could have discovered this dying man, Grian was his best bet. The guy's life would be at risk with anyone less qualified. Nerves had no place within him. He wasn't an amateur. Grian worked well under pressure. He had to for the sake of his job. He forced himself to focus on doing this as correctly as he could. Getting hung up on this being above his usual pay grade was not advisable in the slightest. The vet had begun to adjust the other to account for his injury when a cough sputtered from the throat of the man in question. It was followed by an even deeper groan. The man was stirring. How inconvenient. "What? Who?" The stranger's voice was hoarse, extremely agonized. He raised a trembling hand, and Grian took it hastily. "What's happening?" "Rest," Grian shushed. "I'm here to help." Instead of calming him, the words seemed to send a shot of adrenaline through the injured man. He jerked as if attempting to sit up. Grian's heart squeezed at the scream of pain that echoed around them. "Hey, come on, you're hurting yourself. Calm down." Grian rushed. "I know it sucks, but I need you to stop." The vet did his best to coax him to relax again, but the other heaved out fast breaths and did not heed his warning. Finally, Grian grew irritated. Without really thinking it through, he slammed a hand down on the other's shoulder, pinning him back against the wall. The man paused his fighting all at once, likely shocked. "Didn't you hear me? I said I was going to help." Grian gritted out, "Now quit moving and listen." There was a shuffling sound, and in the dimness, Grian thought he saw a nod. He exhaled, releasing his grip on both the other's torso and his hand. The stranger thankfully did not move again. "Who?" He heard the same rough voice start. "Who are you?" "My name is Grian," he answered. "I'm a vet, and I'm going to do what I can for you. This isn't going to be a pretty process, so are you willing to help me out a little bit?" Yeah, okay," the other said, quiet and cautious. "I guess I could." "Perfect," Grian hummed. "First, do you have any light sources on you, like a phone or something?" A beat of nothing passed between them. Then the stranger gradually raised his hand. Grian's eyes widened as a faint red light flared to life, seeming to come out of thin air. The stranger moved his fingers in repetitive circular motions, letting the light grow steadily brighter at the tip of it. He knew what it was the second his gaze fell upon it. A superpower. Whoa. Grian gasped. I have to say, this isn't exactly what I had in mind. Superpowers were rare, and for a civilian with said powers to reveal them was even rarer. The hero agency recruited any they could find with remarkable characteristics, claiming they were too valuable to be allowed to roam around unchecked. A grand majority of villains originated because of exactly that, so it was better to keep quiet if you had powers and didn't feel like working for the agency. There weren't any details that were particularly threatening about this individual's revealed powers, though. All it seemed to do was shed light on their situation, and it wasn't even all that bright. Still, anything was a blessing in the shadowy alleyway, whether it be barely feasible and tinted red or not. Grian observed the details that had been previously lost to him. The wound was the easiest thing for his gaze to latch onto. There was blood everywhere, and more leaking out the arrow as the seconds passed. Whatever outfit the man had on was torn and ruined, sticking to the wound in a way that was surely unpleasant. Grian went ahead and ripped the majority of it away, careful to not make the circumstances worse than they had already been. It didn't look terribly deep embedded, but the tip was the problem he was the most worried about. Luckily, from his surface-level knowledge of human anatomy, he was fairly certain that there were no arteries nor major organs in the specific area that had been pierced. If it had been slightly more to one side, it likely wouldn't have hit the guy at all. Moving along vaguely, he scanned for alternative injuries. Perhaps the most surprising thing of all was that he didn't see any limbs that looked out of place. After falling from a roof, wouldn't a broken bone or two make sense? He shook his head, writing it off as a stroke of good luck, and forced himself back on task. With the ability to see slightly regained, Grian returned to searching his bag. He retrieved a box of rubber gloves, a handful of tools, alcohol, chlorhexidine, gauze, bandages, and 2 clean cloths. One of the cloths was laid out on the ground at his side to make the tools more easily accessible. Before doing anything with them, he let his eyes wander over the other's outfit. Though it was a bit bloody, he found what he was looking for. With a whispered apology, he removed the man's belt and held it up to his face. I don't have drugs. You're gonna have to bite this. Thankfully, the man complied. His expression was cast in shadow still, as the light only reached so far, but Grian could bet he'd find fear there if he could see it. No one wanted to experience an impromptu surgery from someone they didn't know. It was a nightmare situation for both of them. And put these on, please, Grian said, passing him the box of gloves. The man only took one, presumably keeping his other hand free for the sake of their light source. Grian put on a pair too, then continued. He opted to explain what was happening to keep the panicking to a minimum. I'm going to fish out the arrowhead and then stitch you up to the best of my ability. Is that all right? There was a sharp intake of breath and then a vague, nodding movement. He couldn't speak around the belt, but the confirmation was enough. Grian picked up the gauze. He unwrapped several large squares, then took the lids off his bottles of alcohol and chlorhexidine. With a spoken warning, the vet began his cleaning of the wound. He alternated between pouring alcohol and chlorhexidine onto the gauze and carefully prepping the area. His patient was, to his credit, fairly well behaved. Except for a few slight shifts, the man remained remarkably unmoving. Grian was impressed that he could keep his powers going through the stinging pain to allow for visibility. Hopefully that trend would continue into the main bit. Once the cleaning was sufficiently complete, the real work could begin. Grian put the gauze aside and removed a few of his pre-sanitized tools from their autoclave bags. Okay, here's the hard part, Grian started. I need you to hold one side of your wound open and bring this light closer with your other hand. Think you can do that for me? There was another quick nod. The vet proceeded. The process itself was actually not that bothersome compared to some more pressing surgeries he'd done on smaller scales. The arrowhead was expectedly flared when he found it. However, the fact that his experience with this sort of projectiles was limited to fiction and history meant it was smaller than anticipated. With a little incision and maneuvering, Grian was able to dislodge it and remove the arrow while avoiding major damages. The stranger groaned and let out soft cries, but he did not fall unconscious or dim his light at all. It was rather impressive. Perfect. Great job. We're almost done. Grian whispered his reassurances. He took the removed arrow, wiped the blood off, and tossed it farther from them, hoping it would do less damage there. I'm going to stitch this up now, all right? Hold the two sides of the wound shut for me, just like this. As soon as he'd coaxed his patient into doing as he was told, Grian backed up. He switched out his tools, wrapping the bloodied one in separate cloth to be sterilized later. Then he retrieved his suture needles and their clamps, beginning the process of stitching the wound closed. This was the easiest part for him, something he could do in his sleep. It was done after only a couple of minutes of precise work. The bandages were secured into a place a moment later. Grian put his tools away, cleaning up the dried blood that remained on the man's skin, and sighed with relief. Done. The red light of the man's powers extinguished immediately, and he melted into the wall behind him. His chest rose and fell fast in the darkness of the alley, but his pained noises came after much longer intervals now. Thank you, came the man's scratchy voice. Grian hadn't noticed him removing the belt from between his teeth, but evidently he had. I think you saved my life. Don't mention it, Grian replied. Though the other was correct, the guy would have likely bled out or gotten a life-threatening infection if the wound hadn't been treated quite so immediately. You should still probably get checked out by a human doctor to be safe. Grian gradually faded out of his work mentality. They were still stuck in a grungy back alleyway in the middle of the night. It was no place for a patient to heal, and if they were bow-wielding villains shooting at civilians around the area, they wouldn't be wise to stay in one place for too long. Hey, Grian started. I'm going to go see if I can flag down a car or find a payphone to call an ambulance. I'll be back. No, wait, the man exclaimed, jerking and catching Grian's wrist as he stood. His grip was surprisingly strong. Please don't leave. I can't afford more attention drawn this way. You don't want an ambulance? Grian frowned at the strange wording. I'm pretty sure a hospital visit is very much in order now, so let me go. Grian, the man insisted, and the vet paused. That's your name, right? Grian? Yeah? Well, Grian, he went on, this is unfortunately the part where you have to listen to me. No hospitals, no ambulances, no flagging anybody down. It's too dangerous. While Grian was glad to hear any amount of energy returning to the guy's voice, he didn't like this new attitude. What kind of egomaniac did he have to be to think himself above proper medical attention? What danger exactly was he placing ahead of his own life? Not even Grian was confident enough in his job that evening to be certain nothing horrific had happened. Fine, wise guy, Grian huffed. If not on a stretcher, how exactly do you plan on getting out of here without reopening your stitches? There was a heavy silence for several seconds. Finally, the guy stammered, I'll call someone. Grian's eyes widened, and he couldn't help but shout, You've had a phone this whole time? Whoa, hey, the man gasped, volume dropping to a whisper. Keep your voice down. Why should I? Grian, if anything, grew louder. His words bounced off the walls. You just made me remove an arrow in mood lighting while you could have used a phone instead. He was interrupted by a sharp tug on his arm where the other still had a hold on him. Caught off guard, Grian stumbled forward and landed hard on his knees. He hissed, yanking back his wrist. The man moved faster than he expected, slapping a hand over his mouth and clamping the other on the back of his neck to keep him from getting away. Grian tried anyways, giving muffled complaints. Please, Grian, the man said, still keeping himself quiet. Just listen, don't you hear that? There was a new underlying urgency in his pleading. It made the vet halt his struggle and stare forward. He assumed the man's face was directly across from him, but as before, no amount of adjusting to the light would allow him to decipher details. Then he did hear. Somewhere beyond the alley there was a crash and the rising crescendos of approaching police sirens. It sounded like a continuous barrage of horrible things. Grian's brows furrowed as he attempted to pinpoint what exactly was happening. He did not like the conclusion he landed on. His gaze flicked to where he knew he'd thrown aside a blood-soaked arrow. His ears caught on the disastrous cacophony of sound, and his mind connected the pieces around the reason why one might fear what could happen if they were to venture beyond the alleyway. A fight. That commotion was coming from a fight, and far too close for comfort. Only heroes and villains had the ability to cause such sudden, inexplicable unrest. As a lone civilian out on an ungodly hour of night, the possibility of encountering danger with a battle nearby was heightened significantly. And then he would also have to consider the fact that his scrubs were likely coated in someone else's blood. Whether he was the hero's main focus or not, seeing that sight stumbling down the street wasn't going to give the right impression to anyone. The man had been smart to stop him, even though he'd gone about it in a confusing way. Gradually, Grian relaxed, nodding into the hand on his mouth. With a relieved sigh, the other pulled away, slumping against the wall once more. "Thanks," he said. "We just have to keep our heads down until they pass. I'll call someone after that." Grian still wasn't over the fact that there had been a phone present during the earlier process, but he agreed that it was best to wait. The two of them stayed still, sitting on the unsanitary pavement of the alley for several more minutes. They listened as the chaos of the fight grew louder, and eventually they were able to make out jumbled shouts, one-liners from heroes and witty retorts from villains. It was impossible to tell who exactly was out there, but it was best not to get too familiar. Grian had a baseline knowledge of the mainstream heroes and villains that collectively terrorized the village. While there were prominent topics of conversation amongst those on social media and most newscasters, he was typically too distracted by his job to care much. It wasn't often that they came near his neighborhood. From what he could remember off the top of his head, there weren't many villains that were capable of causing such audible trouble. The city obviously had its fair share of petty criminals fueled by audacity given to them by their powers, but if the heroes got wind of them, they were usually cleaned up fairly fast. Grian never imagined he'd be in a position like this one, horrifyingly close to the action. It really was deafening and constant. Were he not already sitting, his legs might have given out from the layer of fear that gripped his heart. Finally, after ages, things seemed to stop. Grian frowned, glancing at his companion, but the stranger gave no indication that it was safe to speak yet. He almost took the initiative, but the noise of whirring stopped him. Eclipse and Boogeyman got away. Grian's breath hitched as a new voice came from directly above them. It was feminine, but not one that he could recognize off the top of his head as either a hero or a villain. Slowly, he let his eyes wander up. Grian had just enough time to train his gaze on a silhouette before the stranger was grabbing his shoulder. Without warning, a hand stifled his startled yelp, and he was twisted around to be pressed against the brick wall. Grian instinctively fought back, but the other pinned his legs under his own and hissed out, "Be quiet, dude." Grian remembered himself and their situation, forcing himself to be calm. The stranger had crowded them into a corner between a handful of boxes and the building. With his larger frame hovering over Grian in this position, the minuscule amount of light that had been coming in was promptly stamped out. It was a little cramped, but they were officially as hidden in the shadows as they could possibly get. The vet was impressed, and slightly worried about the sudden exertion on his patient's end. Not 20 minutes prior, Grian had finished his stitches. Throwing caution to the wind and maneuvering them both as he had contained the potential for serious consequences. If the man had twisted the wrong way, even a bit while they were doing so, still so fresh, something could have come undone. Grian wished he had light again, wished he could glimpse his work for half a second to assure all was right with it. Unfortunately, the situation didn't allow for that, and he was forced to silently stew over the chance of a malfunction. Honestly, when nothing happened around them for several seconds, he debated just reaching up and checking if the bandage were bloody with his own 2 hands. Well, they can't have gone far. Grian froze as a second person joined them overhead, this one a man. A shaky exhale left the stranger above him. He couldn't look to see any more, but if these people were getting this reaction from his companion, the new arrivals definitely weren't welcome. I shot one of them earlier, came the woman again. She spoke with unwavering confidence, as if admitting to something like it was normal. He fell somewhere down here, I think. Grian's brows furrowed slowly. She shot someone? Someone who fell. Was that referring to his patient? That was ages ago, the man complained. He's probably gotten away by now. I don't know. We've got a lot of good hits at the beginning of the fight. He was pretty out of it, even before the arrow, the woman said. Grian heard shuffling from above and felt the man holding him tense. Let's go check, I guess. Check? Check? They were coming into the alleyway to check for the man they'd shot? Grian's heart rate sped up so immediately that his vision swam and he became lightheaded. Being a few blocks from a villain was dangerous, but encountering one literally steps away was unheard of for him. He should run, hide, scream for help. Except he couldn't do any of those things, because the man was squeezing his shoulder and whispering, "Stay calm. Worst case scenario, I'll get you out alive at least." That was a stupidly terrifying worst case scenario. It did nothing to ease Grian's growing fear. Getting just him out alive, leaving the implications open that one of them might not be. And the vet was supposed to be all right with that statement. His ears caught on more shuffling, then 2 grunts from somewhere on his level as people landed against concrete. There was a click, and a sliver of light made itself known. Over the stranger's shoulder, he could tell the 2 newcomers had dropped down by the mouth of the alleyway. Their flashlight's beam wasn't the most effective, but it illuminated enough to be worrisome. Grian couldn't even shiver from the weight of all that was stirring within him. This was a nightmare from start to finish. Why hadn't he simply stayed at work when his co-workers made the suggestion? Why did he have to get himself caught up in this mess, and what did he do to deserve it? The light drew nearer and nearer. Both Grian and the stranger held their breaths. It was closer now, almost reaching around the corner of the dumpster and shining upon them. Their perfect, shadowy cover would be useless soon. Oh, wait, look at this. The flashlight's beam stopped and turned away from them. Grian frowned, confused. Oh, the woman gasped. That's my arrow. He got it out in one piece. The arrowhead is designed to break off if anyone tries to yank it. Grian's mind jerked to the projectile he'd thrown aside after his emergency surgery. So they'd found it. Tossing it had been an action done mostly unconsciously to prevent either of them from stepping on it in the dark. Now he worried it might alert them to their presence. It's been wiped off too, she observed. There goes the DNA sample. Clever. We shouldn't have underestimated him, the man replied, solemn. He got away after all that effort. Sucks, the woman said. We were so close. Bad luck, replied her companion. Come on, we should go file our reports now. Yeah, she agreed. I'll call HQ. Grian listened to a dial tone startup echoing off the walls. Headquarters, this is Slayer checking in, the woman declared, footsteps starting up and the sound of her voice getting further and further away. I've got Furioso with me. No sign of the bamboozlers. They're still evading capture. We're on our way back. Grian strained to listen for longer, but he couldn't get past that point. Slowly, the information he'd absorbed in such rapid succession began to actually sink in. HQ? Slayer, Furioso, bamboozlers? Those were all names Grian recognized. Something was off about the whole situation. Why would the villains they'd been pointedly hiding from call into a supposed headquarters and refer to themselves by the aliases of the city's 2 biggest heroes? The man hovering over him leaned back, releasing Grian completely. Cold night air rushed in to fill the void. I guess it's out in the open now, the stranger hummed. Shame. I wanted to avoid this. There was a loud sigh, and he watched the stranger's silhouette blindly reach around for something. Apparently, he found it by his old spot along the wall, because he lifted it to his face and wrapped stuff Grian couldn't see around his head. A clicking sound, followed by a small hiss of pressurized air, filled the silence, and a dull light was emitted from around the stranger's jaw. Grian could make out the details of what seemed to be a gas mask over his mouth. It wasn't like the gas masks he's seen in the past, though. This one was smaller, highlighted by red and blue lights, and it seemed to be almost more for the sake of face coverage than anything else. With the additional glow occupying the space between them, Grian was finally able to catch features that were lost in the prior darkness. His curiosity outweighed all else, and he drank them in greedily. This man had his intense eyes trained directly on the vet, wavy hair that fell slightly over his forehead but was otherwise slicked back. His clothing was odd. A striped collared shirt left loosely unbuttoned, layered with a black vest and a small hat upon his head. The fabric around his wound was still torn and ruined. Something about the guy's appearance was familiar, like he'd seen it dozens of times before. His subconscious screamed at him, but it took far too long for him to hear it. Grian remembered what the two mysterious figures had been talking about earlier. Flashes of their conversation came at him at once. Eclipse, boogeyman, shot one, he got away, bamboozlers, evading capture. None of these phrases were usually uttered around a civilian. They felt more like something one would hear in reference to a villain. Grian sucked in a breath, alarms blaring in his mind. Suddenly, the outfit made sense. Suddenly, falling off a roof and landing without breaking a bone made sense. Suddenly, the superpowers and high pain tolerance and hiding from people who didn't appear to be evil made sense. This man wasn't a civilian, wasn't even a hero. He was a villain. And if the other people had actually been Slayer and Furioso like they'd claimed, then this was not just any villain either. He was a part of the most dangerous trio in the entire city, one of the infamous bamboozlers. According to Slayer's report, all three had escaped, but Eclipse and Boogeyman were not either of the two that had been shot. That left one singular person as a possibility. With his newfound context, Grian couldn't believe what he hadn't recognized earlier. There was only one person in the public eye that dressed like a twisted carnival worker, sported a gas mask over his lower half of his face, and wielded powers appearing in the form of a red glow. "Ringmaster," Grian whispered. The man, Ringmaster, let out a chilling laugh. The sound was surrounded by an electrical edge, and with a distorted pitch from the vocal modulator located in his mask. "Hello, Doctor," he mused. "You were quite the help today." When Ringmaster spoke, it was distinctly different from the normal voice he'd heard previously. This was fit for television, dramatic speeches, and thrown threats. There was an incomprehensible change between the man he'd stitched up a few minutes ago and the ominous figure in front of him. The scent of blood haunting the alleyway became less like the leftovers of a procedure and more like the forewarning of what was to come. The emptiness of the streets beyond the alleyway didn't only mean lack of help for someone else, but him as well. No one would hear him if he screamed. Grian pressed himself as far into the wall as he could get until the bricks scraped at his back through his scrubs and there was nowhere else to go. Mustering up what little confidence he could, Grian asked, "Are you gonna kill me now?" "Kill you?" No, Ringmaster said, huffing. Grian saw his eyes crinkle as though he were smiling. "I just said you were helpful, didn't I? No reason to kill you." Grian breathed a sigh of relief, probably a bit too early. Unless he heard the other start. There was a pause, and Ringmaster leaned a few inches closer. "You wouldn't have happened to catch a glimpse of my face, would you?" "What?" Grian's heart hammered in his chest frantically. He shook his head. No, not even a little bit. I was too focused on your injury. He hoped the desperation that dripped from his lips wouldn't have the opposite effect and put him in danger. Grian truly hadn't seen anything, hadn't even really tried very hard. Still, if a villain had reason to suspect a civilian knew his secret identity, then that created a motive to kill. Grian was extremely not okay with the idea of being exploited for his skills and murdered shortly after. Thankfully, Ringmaster leaned back again, seemingly content. Good, he said. In that case, you have nothing to worry about. Not right now, at least. No part of the way he spoke calmed Grian. He wouldn't so much as think about relaxing until he was tucked under the cover of his bed with every window and door in his apartment firmly locked. Even at that point, he was certain he'd be paranoid for the foreseeable future. The villain raised his wrist to his mouth, and Grian noticed a regular-looking watch there for the first time. Eclipse, it's me, the ringmaster said. There was a faint buzzing, and Grian saw him tap an earpiece a few times. I've sent you my location. I need to be picked up. The buzzing returned for a few seconds. While it was there, Ringmaster hummed and nodded along. Yeah, I did get shot, he said. No, I'm fine, actually. I'll tell you all about it in a second. He's on the phone with someone, Grian realized. Eclipse. One of the other bamboozlers. Grian swallowed past a lump in his throat. If this man was calling in reinforcement, that meant he would not only be subjecting the vet to his own threatening presence, but likely the rest of the members in the notorious trio as well. That was more than a nondescript civilian should have ever had to withstand. Ringmaster muttered a few more things before lowering the watch and returning his eyes to Grian. My friends will be here soon, he told the vet. Got any words of parting medical wisdom for me? Anything I should know about these handy little stitches? Medical information. Grian could talk about that. Whether shaking in fear or doing his job as normal, this stuff existed on autopilot for him. Realistically, though, was it something he should give out? Perhaps he could claim ignorance for his initial assistance, but knowingly continuing to help a criminal could put him in harm's way, couldn't it? Was he in more danger if he spoke up or stayed silent? Mulling over it for a few seconds longer, Grian eventually relented. Well, you should keep it clean and change your bandages often for the next few days. The stitches and sutures themselves should absorb into your body or flake off in roughly 2 weeks, depending on how you're healing. Oh, you know your stuff. Ringmaster chuckled. He propped his chin on his hand. You fix guys up in alleyways often, or is this a new hobby for you? His tone was light, joking, but his voice modulator still pricked Grian's nerves with anxiety. It was a funny comment when removed from the situation's context, and yet the vet couldn't bring himself to even smile. Noticing this, the crinkle around the villain's eyes lessened slightly. Grian sat up straight and cleared his throat. You were just lucky that I walked by. So it would seem, Ringmaster muttered. Grian heard him take a breath, like he was going to say something more, but both of them stopped as a distant whirring sound came into audible range. Suddenly, a grappling hook shot out and caught on the roof over their heads. A figure swooped in after it, landing gracefully a few feet from them. Ringmaster brightened at the sight. Eclipse! Over here. A flashlight beam blinded them both as a woman's voice, also distorted by a modulator, cut through the silence. Ringmaster, are you okay? We saw you fall off the building, but we couldn't reach you. She stopped dead when Grian was also illuminated. Well. Her shoulders rolled back, and her countenance changed. You didn't mention it was a 2-for-1 deal over the comms? Yeah, who is this guy? Grian startled as a man materialized directly next to him. How did you... Invisibility, duh. The man replied like it was obvious. Don't you know who I am? Grian blinked away dark spots and leftover shadows from his eyes to take in the newcomers better. They both wore outfits similar to Ringmaster, adorning in the same colors of red, blue, and black with matching hats, suspenders, and gas masks. He did recognize these people, especially when all three of them were together. They were the Bamboozlers, with Ringmaster being the guy he'd helped, leaving Eclipse and Boogeyman as the two that had just arrived. In that context, invisibility as a simple explanation for the man's sudden appearance wasn't so far-fetched. No longer having the safeguard of darkness, Grian forced himself to deadpan, revealing nothing about his inner panic. Villains were twisted people, and these were some of the fiercest of them. Should they pick up on how deeply he feared them, they'd likely worsen their antagonizing. Grian worked to untie the knot in his stomach by pretending that this was just a group of 3 stray dogs with attitude problems. As long as he didn't seem like a threat or a chew toy, there was a chance for survival. "This, my friends, is the guy that saved me," Ringmaster declared, loud and boisterous. "Stitched me up and everything right in this alleyway. I am practically good as new." To prove his point, Ringmaster made a big gesture down to his side, still bandaged and thankfully not bleeding, though with the way he was acting, that wasn't likely to remain true for long. "Careful," Grian hissed without thinking. "Too many large movements might open it up again. Take it easy." Silence followed his words, and Grian glanced around to meet 3 pairs of disbelieving eyes. Ah, he realized. Just talked back to a supervillain. Not good. Instead of hostility, however, he was hit with a bout of shocked laughter from Ringmaster. "Sorry, Doctor, sorry," he wheezed. "I'll relax. Don't burst a blood vessel." Eclipse and Boogeyman looked as appalled by their teammates' demeanor as Grian felt. Eclipse took a step forward nervously. Did you conk your head? What's so funny?" "Oh, nothing really," Ringmaster answered, gradually calming down again. "It's just, he was so nervous a second ago, and now he's being snappy with me. It's interesting." Grian thought it was interesting, too. Switching up that quickly between work mode and fearing for his life was not normal. He hypothesized that it might have to do with the very long shift he'd only recently finished prior to this entire debacle. He was running on fumes previously, and as he sat amongst a crowd of villains after performing emergency surgery, Grian wasn't sure if even that much remained. "Anyways," Eclipse sighs, urging them along. "Why exactly did this stranger save you?" Her eyes turned to him, bright blue and menacing. "Are you trying to get some sort of favor out of us? Because that won't work," she said, jaw clenched. The woman removed a short stick from her belt, but upon pressing a button near the bottom, it rapidly extended. Grian bit back a scream at the sight of her signature spear, still stained with blood from her earlier fight. "We could just kill you right here." Grian held up his hands in defense, but he wasn't given a chance to speak. Ringmaster stepped in first. "Calm down. He didn't know who I was when he helped me out." "I don't trust it," Boogeyman chimed in. "Maybe it's a trick." "Yeah, we should take him back to the BAM bunker for further questioning." Eclipse agreed. Ringmaster shot her a dirty look, but she just folded her hands in front of her. "Please, only a little bit of torture." Grian's guard raised as high as it could possibly go. Unconsciously, his gaze drifted over to the closest thing to a safety line he currently had amidst the strange company. Ringmaster. The guy was a villain, but he was the only one that owed Grian anything, and the only one that might be able to hold off his bloodthirsty companions. To his surprise, Ringmaster was already watching him, eyes thick with amusement. He thought this was funny. Grian shivered and scrunched his nose briefly, just enough that this one man would notice, but the other 2 would not. Ringmaster snorted, letting the vet know that the slight had been communicated. "No Eclipse." Ringmaster sighed. "He didn't see my face or anything, so he's not a threat. It's a waste of energy." "Party pooper," Boogeyman grumbled, still uncomfortably close to Grian. Thankfully, he tipped backwards and hopped to his feet, stretching over his head. "All right, well, you needed help getting out of here, right? Let's go then." Ringmaster extended a hand. Grian winced as the villain's teammates yanked him up without any amount of thought given to his side. Evidently it was felt. Ringmaster cursed quietly, and his hands shot to his bandages. Grian waited to see red, waited for the agony to return, waited to see his hard work wasted by carelessness. It was a relief when it did not come. Ringmaster tossed him a sheepish look. "Sorry, Doctor. I'll do better. Starting now." The vet did not reply, figuring it best not to give the villains any reason to linger for longer in his general vicinity. No one urged him into it. They had taken to, now that the ringmaster was on his feet and able to shuffle this way and that, whispering among themselves. Grian stayed still, knees raised to his chest as he tried to melt into the corner. He wanted to be forgotten. Unfortunately, though, he hadn't been getting what he wanted recently. Ringmaster turned to him a moment later. "We're gonna head out now, Doctor," he said. "Get home safely, and try not to call the police yet. We'll know if you do." Grian nodded, taking the threat at face value. Whether it was the truth or not, he wasn't planning on finding out. Besides, what could the cops do that the heroes had not failed to do 100 times over? Content with his agreement, Ringmaster straightened and gave his attention back to the team. "Let's go. Cover my flank," he spoke, suddenly stern. "No large movements if it can be helped. It's going to be a long walk." Grian remained firmly in place until the retreating forms of the 3 villains had completely left his view, and then collapsed in on himself. Were he not so tired, there might even be tears of relief. He wasn't dead. Maybe miracles really did exist.